I think of the times we shall have together and the clinging children. Because Dad was planning his leave that he was entitled to about 6 months late, but he would take it sometime in the middle of 1943. Meanwhile, he thought, before I go on leave, I should go and visit my staff on other islands, see how they're getting on, because their wives and children have all evacuated. So he climbed on board the Patricia Cam at Goulburn Island. He had a young goat, fully killed and dressed on his shoulders. As he came to the Black Cam, he said, more or less said, "This is my ticket, you know. The Navy cook on your ship would be very interested in using this as feeding a crew of hungry sailors." So Dad left joined the ship at Goulburn Island, went on to Milngimbi. The captain was very relieved to get rid of about 40 drums of high octane fuel at that stage, because they were all the time expecting a Japanese attack could happen. And he said, "I'll make a good flare if an incendiary bomb hit us." Went on to Elcho Island, and from there, overnight, kept sailing on toward Marchambah, at the far end of the Wessel Islands, where they had to deliver the code books to the coast watchers, because Dad was delivering code books all the way to the coast watchers along the route. Their route was interrupted, their trip was interrupted by the Jake attack. It dropped a bomb, 60 kilogram bomb down the main hatch in a very vertical sort of dive. Took everyone by surprise. About 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they were having a sort of midday siesta and having had lunch and all that sort of thing. And it dropped this bomb, which brought the ship down almost immediately. It went through the hatch cover, hit the planking at the bottom and exploded, and broke the ship in two. In the next, by the time the men were starting to organise themselves in the water, another 60 kilogram bomb dropped among them. They thought it was a machine gun attack they would get then, so they dived, and Dad dived too with them. Instead, the bomb, as you know what happens when you drop a jelly knight into a dam with fish in it, it kind of knocks the inhabitants around a lot. So Dad's already hereditary deafness was exacerbated by shattered eardrums by the time he got to the surface. When the Japanese captured Dad, they finished their strafing, about 20 minutes of strafing after the second bomb attack, and took Dad prisoner, because they were going to land on the water. This is what had puzzled the islanders of Dodo, that they'd been able to get somebody, a seaplane, was able to bring a prisoner in. And that's how they took him. Took Dad to Dodo, where he was interrogated, and not very well looked after, I'd say, during that interrogation, because they thought he might have been a naval officer with a lot of information, or a coast watcher with information. Whatever it was, he was their target. Then they decided if they couldn't get no information out of him, they would starve him. So for the 2 weeks, they decided they wouldn't feed him anymore. But he was helped very much by natives of Dodo and Yarrow Islands, who sneaked some food into his jail cell when they could. Meanwhile, our RAF Squadron 7 on Hall Island was able to find the survivors who had found their way down by raft to Gulawuru Island, and all except 2 survived that. 2 of them were sorely injured when they landed and died on the island. About that's where the raft they were on landed, on that very beautiful beach, you might say. The two men who died were then buried, you might say. You see a couple of a dark area to the right of that raft. That's where they were buried, and stones were put over the grave. That photo was taken by the Beaufort bomber from Horn Island when it first discovered them. It was quite a coincidence, you know, that the pea patrol that was done every day by the Horn Island Beauforts was not on this route. But the CO said to Ben Gaines, the sergeant pilot on the Beaufort, said, see if we can get some photographs. Just do a photo reconnaissance of the Western Islands, because we have a suspicion from the coast watchers that the submarines are coming ashore and being refueling the float planes and giving them extra range. So it was on that coincidence of an additional change to their route that the Beaufort pilots were able to find the survivors. Gad's prison was as simple as I can draw that. One large cell where he was interred. Two forms were put together to form a bed, at least kept him off the ground where cockroaches and rats and that sort of thing couldn't get too easily to him. But the mosquitoes would have been able to. That was the first word Mum had of anything happening. She got suspicious when she saw that. Small ship sunk in Gulf. Casualties all right, survivors have been located. But not all survivors have been located, because Dad hadn't been. While Dad was in jail in Dobo, our aircraft were able to get the range of this Japanese base. It first started when a commander of the 32 Squadron, I think, from Kimberley Creek, Beaufighters, was able to get his plane far enough to get to Dobo and back, because they knew the float plane base was there. He did it by replacing two of the guns, two of the machine guns on the plane by an extra fuel tank, and got the range enough so he could go to Dover and do some bombing and strafing, and then get back to base. So the Beaufighters and the Hudsons. The Hudsons were interesting too. They were flown by Dutch pilots who had evacuated from the Dutch islands during the war when the Japanese invaded. And the Dutch pilots were very keen to be seen by the Japanese. And so they made sure the number 18 Netherlands Squadron and RAF Squadron, a combined squadron, Netherlands and RAF, had the Dutch insignia on the side. So they liked to get low enough so the Japanese could see that they were Dutch, getting back on them. So after a amount of bombing, and that photo was taken at Dobo just after a final bombing raid, almost the final one, by Liberator bombers. When the bombing had been going on rather heavily for several days, the Japanese officers in charge were not very happy about things. The CEO had malaria, and which didn't make him very amenable to a good mood. And he called on the two other officers to decide what they should do with the prisoner. He'd already decided. He said, we've got to get rid of this prisoner somehow. He's not helped us with any information, and we've had nothing but curry, you might say, since our interrogation of him. And so he would have been very weak at the time, after 2 weeks with very little food. And so they half dragged him to the edge of a bomb crater and there decapitated him. That was the end of my father's life, and as he died there, it was overlooking the ocean with a very strong sense of who he was and what he was about. He knew his mission in life, and he felt he'd fulfilled it in any way. Meanwhile, we were being raised by our mother in Brisbane, right through 1944, 1948. There are two different photographs. In between, Mum had to work out what had happened to Dad, because nobody knew. The war ended, and still Mum had no idea where Dad was, what had happened to him. They were very concerned about whether he might turn up, and Mum had always hoped that he might. That knock on the door, or a telephone message might mean he was safe and back with them. But no such thing happened. So she decided she'd find out for herself. She wrote to the editors of the 5 major newspapers around Australia and asked any returning serviceman or anyone any inkling of where Dad was or what happened to him to please let her know or let the newspaper know. She got three replies to that, but two major ones was John Ego, who'd been second officer on the Pat Can when it was bombed, and had been with Dad in the water when he was taken prisoner. He was a very good eyewitness of what had happened to Dad and where he'd gone. And the intelligence officer from Horn Island, who got the report of the finding of the survivors. And together those two people were able to tell Mum after the war was over and peace declared that they knew, had an idea. They informed the people who were investigating crimes and that sort of thing, or missing servicemen, informed them, and they finally got together a group of people who could go to Dobo and discover what had happened, because they had a very strong suspicion that squadron operating from there was the one who had taken Dad capture. Lego got in touch with he became Naval Liaison Officer in the North East Western area, and Wilson was with General Aiken, one of General MacArthur's men. Mum herself wrote a letter to MacArthur in her appeal for information, and finally got to the top, you might say. But while that was happening, they found that where Dad had been buried, interrogated the islanders, questioned them about what had happened. Some of them been eyewitnesses of his death, from a distance, of course. And after the Japs had left his body there, they had picked up his body and taken it and buried it in a special place, which they set aside and marked. So that meant that when the war crimes people came through to interrogate what had happened there, and then went to Japan and discovered the officers had been responsible for Dad's death, and arraigned them as murderers, you might say, the information was starting to come out. It all came out finally in the war crimes trial in Stanley Jail in Hong Kong, where the men had been interred, the 3 Japanese officers. They were all given a death penalty, first of all. After they appealed, one was given death sentence, and the other to life imprisonment. So one was hanged in Stanley Jail for Dad's death, and the other two had life sentences. One of the people who helped me very much and encouraged me in writing my book was Peter Stanley. He was at the National Museum when I first met him there. He's now with the Australian Defence Forces Academy. And this is his account, it might be his summing up of the story. I've been to Yirrkala and Ngimbi, and also other places, remembering the men who were killed or survived the Patricia Cam incident. And this plaque was laid at Ngimbi and Yirrkala, and also in the War Museum, the East Point Museum in Darwin. Names not only the white people, the white men, the Caucasians, the Navy men, but also my father and the Aboriginal men with their full names from Ngimbi and Yirrkala, mostly. Paddy Babawan, the second bottom on the left-hand side, was the one who had been the pilot Dad brought on board. I can tell you about that. When he brought the young kid from the flock for their food, Paddy got on board with him as an Aboriginal pilot who would help them navigate around the islands. So a few weeks ago we went to a last post ceremony at the War Memorial, remembering one of the men who'd been killed, who died of his wounds, you might say, on Gulawuru Island after the bombing of the back camp. And photo there of myself with the blue shirt, my son on the left, and my nephews on the right. The one on the far right is Elaine's son, Luke. He happened about it deliberately. I made a point of taking time off from his work as a vet in Canberra. And the second from the right is Ashley McAlpine, Flight Lieutenant Ashley McAlpine from the RAF, who is still in the RAF Reserve. My nephew, my other sister's son. So we've got a family group there together at the War Memorial. But I'll never forget the friendship that the Aboriginal people have reciprocated to us. When I was at Ngimbi and Yirrkala, always had an arm around me or very close to me to help me, to steady me and to make sure that I was cared for. And that man there is Barnaby, who is the mayor of the East Island Council, and a very well-educated, very kind man, who was a descendant of one of the men who was killed, one of the Aboriginal men who was killed when the Pat Cam was bombed. So that's the story. The story's still not in it because I have a number of copies here for you to buy if you want to. The opportunity is here for you to ask questions too, if you want to. Anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? Right at the back.
Why do you think they picked your dad?
We don't know. The American intelligence officer was in hospital with one of the mission men after the war. No, not after the war. After this had happened, said there was a strong belief that they knew he was a coast watcher. That the reason why the Japanese aircraft flew away, short flight into the north after the bombing and strafing, and came back, was they checked with base and they were looking for this particular man. We don't know, it's only a supposition, just a guess.
What year did your mother eventually find out?
1946, I think it was. Found out what happened, yes, after the war. Well, thank you very much for being such an attentive audience. I hope you'll keep an interest in the story because it's a very important story from an Australian life that was given during the war.
Thank you.
And of course, if we needed a reminder of how close the war was on TV this morning, they were talking about how they found the Lexington off the coast. It was 75 years last month, wasn't it? Since your father was killed. Look, there was something I found in here, and it was addressed by Noel's father, Len, to the Anzac Day memorial service in 1936. And it's only quite brief, but I think it says a lot about his idea of how the world should be, because he seemed to be a person, and as I said, there's a lot in the book that Noel couldn't say today, but he seemed to be a person who was at peace with the people around him. He genuinely loved being where he was and the Aboriginal people. Anyway, this was the little bit from his talk on Anzac Day 1936. When we seek to know the secret of that great sacrifice and of this sacred commemoration, we discover a true patriotism with which we merged a sense of right and justice and freedom and peace. Today we are called in the spirit of Anzacs to combat a narrow nationalism which is dominating the world, a nationalism in which one race of people cannot see beyond their own borders nor find any good in the people or another race or nation. And that was in 1936, and so how prophetic was that? But I think it's something, with Anzac Day next month, it's something we could all think about. Thank you very much. Just in closing, I'll mention our talk next month is by a friend of mine from Queensland Museum. I've known Greg for over 30 years. Greg's a curer, and he's talking about the capture of the tank in World War I, which will be 100 years next month. I'm not quite sure what we decided to call that. I wanted to call it if it's not tied down, they'll nick it. Because, in fact, it was never meant to come to Queensland as far as I can work out. It was actually meant to go further south, but they called into Brisbane and that was it, we grabbed it. Okay, thank you very much for coming along. And again, thank you once again, Noel. It was wonderful. Thank you.
I'm making my book available for $45. The RRP is $49.95.
So get in today.